was going to say welcome back, but y'all been here.
Welcome back,
I'm the wandering Aramean among you here, like Jacob. Yeah, just for those of you who don't know, I was out west for I was in Florida with my family for a week of vacation. And then I was out west for 2 weeks going around and doing some stuff related to what I do when I'm not teaching the Bible, which is my art work and my martial arts training and tying those two together. So I was wandering the countryside and seeing parts of America that I've never seen before. Grand Canyon is amazing at sunset, just FYI, if you've never been. But we're back, and I believe Tommy and Jeff have been doing the teaching duties while I was gone. Did they do all right? Did it good? Yeah, that was Jeff's story. It's pretty wild, huh? Yeah, he's got an amazing testimony. Tommy's a great teacher, so I was glad that he filled in. It looks like they're taking the day off, so once I'm back, they just stopped coming. So no, we left almost at the end of the Jacob cycle in Genesis. And we're going to finish, we're going to pick back up. This is the last chapter, Genesis 31. This is the last chapter where Jacob is still Jacob. After 31, Jacob is going to get a name change. And we're going to see that next week. But to recap, Jacob has been up in the land of Haran, sort of up at his grandfather's peoples. And he's been working there as a shepherd for his uncle, Laban, or Laban, and he's been there for about 20 years. And in the process, he's gained a family. And he's gained a very dysfunctional family. And he not only has a swindling and cheating, deceitful uncle who's always trying to get the best of him, but he also has feuding sisters as wives, and their handmaidens as concubines. So the family is all sorts of dysfunctional, and it's not at all what we see God intended at the beginning. We're still in the first book of the Bible, and yet family dynamics is one of the early things that crumbles in Scripture with the entry of sin into the world. Way back in Genesis 3, we see it striking at the family first, and everything else fractures and disintegrates from there. But despite that, God is using this fractured and broken and dysfunctional family to accomplish His purpose, His overall purpose in the book of Genesis, which is what? What is His overall purpose? We've hit on this every week.
Show Messiah's line.
Getting warmer? Yep. Oh, I heard what? The seed of Abraham. And what was the promise of the seed of Abraham? 12, Genesis 15, Genesis 17. Through your seed, all the nations of the earth will be blessed. Go back and highlight and underline and circle that and tattoo it on the inside of your eyelids and make sure that you know it, that it is the promise, the purpose of the book of Genesis is to explain how God is keeping His promise to the seed of Abraham. And the purpose of keeping that promise is not because He likes Abraham better than anybody else, not because Abraham's descendants are more holy than anybody else, but because through the seed of Abraham, God is going to bring the world back into relationship with Himself. It's going to undo what went wrong in Genesis 1 through 3. That's the purpose of the promised seed of the woman mentioned in Genesis 3 for the first time, then clarified in Genesis 12 as the seed of Abraham, and now extended through the genealogy of Abraham to his grandson Jacob. And that's where we are now. The Genesis has shifted from a linear genealogy to sort of now a segmented genealogy where it's going to talk about Jacob and particularly Jacob's sons, because they are going to become the people of Israel by the end of the book. And that will set the stage for what God does in the Exodus in the next book, which is part 2 of the Torah. So everything is focused on showing the family line of Jacob. And right now, the promised seed was given in the land of Canaan, which is down here on our invisible map. And Jacob is up here in Haran, which is up here. And God told him when he was leaving Canaan going up to Haran, he stopped at this place right in the middle called Bethel. And God said, Jacob, I'm going to be with you. I'm going to prosper you. You're not going to have anything to do with it. I'm going to do it. And you're going to see who I am. Because at that point, Jacob was not in a relationship with God. Jacob referred to God as the God of my father, not my God. So Yahweh is just the God of Abraham and Isaac still in this narrative, not the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, which he will be next chapter. So Jacob has gone, he's on his way, he's up in Haran. He's been there 20 years. And now in chapter 31, verse 1, Jacob heard that Laban's sons were saying, Jacob has taken everything our father owned and has gained all his wealth from what belonged to our father. And Jacob noticed that Laban's attitude towards him was not what it had been. The Lord said to Jacob, go back to the land of your fathers and to your relatives, and I will be with you. The promise is reiterated. Laban's sons now, Jacob's brothers-in-law, are upset because they think that, well, Jacob's grown prosperous, as we saw in the last chapter, and God has blessed him, and now all the wealth he has, that would have been our inheritance. But now we don't have any inheritance because Jacob has it all, and so there's starting to be some grumbling. There's starting to be some discontent among the brothers-in-law because they think this guy who's come and married our sisters, he's taken over, he's getting all of our family inheritance. So they're getting upset and the situation's getting tense. Verse 4, so Jacob sent word to Rachel and Leah to come out to the fields where his flocks were. He said to them, I see your father's attitude towards me is not what it was before, but the God of my father has been with me. You know that I've worked for your father with all my strength, yet your father has cheated me by changing my wages 10 times. However, God has not allowed him to harm me. If he said, the speckled ones will be your wages, meaning the livestock, then all the flocks gave birth to speckled young. And if he said, the streaked ones will be your wages, then all the flocks bore streaked young. So God has taken away your father's livestock and has given them to me. Now, this explains what went on in the last chapter. In the last chapter, it was left up in the air as to whether Jacob was doing some skillful herd breeding and was increasing the flocks that he wanted by using this little sort of ritual, almost magical practice that he had picked up somewhere. But we see now, looking back, and when Jacob is explaining it, he realizes, no, actually it was God was the one, not the striped branches that I was putting in front of the breeding sheep, but actually God was the one who was making all of the offspring be the ones that Laban said I could have as my payment. So, for instance, the way it worked, most goats and most sheep were not striped, were not spotted, were not streaked. So Laban's saying, with all the ones that are spotted and speckled and streaked, those are your payment, would be Laban saying, all the normal sheep are mine. You have the odd ones, or you have the minority of the sheep, the off-colored ones that there's usually not a high number of those. Those are yours. And so we find out as God made sure that if that's what Laban said, then all of the next season, the next offspring, they would all be that kind. So God was actually increasing the flocks of Jacob through this, through them being raised and shepherded by him. Basically, whatever Laban said, okay, you can have these as your offspring, you can have these as your payment, God made sure that the offspring were of those type. So we see the hand of God, but we didn't see this in the last chapter. If you just read the last chapter, you'd think it was Jacob doing it on his own. This chapter, Jacob himself realizes and explains, no, it's actually God who's been doing this. And this is the first time we really get a glimpse that Jacob is seeing and recognizing that God is the one behind the scenes, being with him and guiding him and prospering him despite anything else. So, verse 10, in breeding season, I once had a dream. He's still talking to his wives. I once had a dream in which I looked up and saw that the male goats mating with the flock were streaked, speckled, and spotted. The angel of God said to me in the dream, Jacob. I answered, here I am. And he said, look up and see that all the male goats mating with the flock are streaked, speckled, or spotted. For I have seen all that Laban has been doing to you. I am the God of Bethel, where you anointed a pillar and where you made a vow to me. Now, leave this land at once and go back to your native land. Genesis 28 is that event at Bethel. You can read that. This is God once again now, after all those years, showing up to him in the form of an angel, in the form of this dream, this interpreted dream, saying, hey, here's what's going on. Remember the last time you saw me? It was that staircase to heaven, and the angels were coming and going, and you saw me, and I was standing there with you and promising you. That's who's talking to you right now. Time to go back. I've made good on my promise. I've given you everything. It's time to return. So, verse 14, Rachel and Leah replied, do we still have any share in the inheritance of our father's estate? Does he not regard us as foreigners? Not only has he sold us, but he has used up what was paid for us. Surely all the wealth that God took away from our father belongs to us and to our children. So do whatever God has told you. So in the ancient world, the price that you would pay for a bride to the family, to the father, would be kept in perpetuity. It would be held by the family and used to increase the family wealth. Then when the father died, that portion would be given to the daughter to provide, to ensure for her continued survival, whether she was married or not. So it was the daughter's share of the inheritance. It wasn't just that the sons got all the inheritance and the daughters got nothing. The daughters got the share that was paid when they got married, which is the bride price. What she's saying here is, our dad not only sold us away, basically, to Jacob, which is maybe a little dig at Jacob as a foreigner, but also he's basically squandered. He's gone through. He doesn't have anything left. He used our bride price to increase his flocks, and all of that's been transferred from him to Jacob through this process of shepherding and breeding. So they're basically saying, hey, our lot's with you now. We don't have anything left for our father. So there's no family ties, there's no emotional ties, and there's no financial ties to keep them in Haran. So they're basically saying, we're going with you. We're going with you. Verse 17, then Jacob put his children and his wives on camels, and he drove all his livestock ahead of him, along with all the goods he had accumulated in Paddan Aram, to go to his father Isaac in the land of Canaan. This raises the question, is Isaac still alive? Isaac lived on for many years after Jacob stole the birthright. We picture that as like Isaac's dying moment. He probably thought it was his dying moment, but he actually went on to live longer. So a lot of interpreters say, well, he was sick and he was ailing and he was old, but he recovered and he lived on for a good number more years. Is he still alive at this point? The text doesn't really make it clear yet. We'll have to wait and see how that plays out. Then when Laban had gone to shear his sheep, Rachel stole her father's household gods. Moreover, Jacob deceived Laban the Aramean by not telling him he was running away. So he fled with all he had. Crossing the river, he headed for the hill country of Gilead. If you look on a map of Israel, the Jordan River runs from the Sea of Galilee straight down to the Dead Sea. The mountains on the east bank of that, the mountains on the east bank is the hill country of Gilead. That's what it's talking about. Now, there's a little note in there, verse 19. Rachel stole her father's household gods. What's going on with that? Well, some people say, well, Laban and Rachel and all of them, they were still worshiping other gods, and so they were pagans, and this was her taking those gods as like a religious protection along the way. Maybe. It's not entirely impossible. But given what she's just said earlier about do we not have any inheritance in our father's estate, and knowing what we know from archaeological finds, particularly in a city called Nuzi, which was in that area, and the documents that were found around the same time as the patriarchs, we know that in the ancient Near East, the practice was, in cases of family inheritance disputes, whoever possessed the household gods, which the Hebrew word is the teraphim, whoever had the teraphim, they had the final say. In other words, that was sort of the seal of who got the estate. The household gods signify the rightful inheritance. They signified the transfer of wealth to the next generation. And they weren't necessarily gods, per se. Most of them were small figurines, like maybe the size of small dolls, carved out of either stone or wood or some type of metal. And they were usually, from what has been found, they were depictions of your dead relatives. They were little representatives of the family. And so it was a taking of the family identity. Anybody ever see the movie Gladiator with Russell Crowe? You know how he prays to his little the little figurines in it of his wife and his kid, and then he buries them. And that's a great parallel to what this is. Those were little teraphim almost. It was much later, and it was Roman rather than ancient Near East, but it was that same idea. Is these were sort of the household spirits, would probably be a better translation, or household angelic watcher, whatever. They were venerated and they were honored because they represented the carrying on of the family. So it's much more likely, rather than Rachel taking elements of her paganism, it's much more likely that what the text is showing us is that Rachel went and stole the inheritance guarantee from her family, from her brothers. And that is a very ironic parallel to what Jacob had done in chapter 28, which is going in and stealing the birthright of the older son, Esau. So she's kind of, you see, it's sort of recapitulating itself, but Jacob doesn't know. His wife is acting like he used to act, and he has no idea. And so the stealing of the gods was basically taking the will, so to speak, taking the family will and writing your name into it, or scratching out everybody else's name, something along those lines. So we can see why it's a big deal. Verse 22, on the third day, Laban was told that Jacob had fled. He thought he was just out, grazing the sheep far away. Taking his relatives with him, he pursued Jacob for 7 days and caught up with him in the hill country of Gilead. Then God came to Laban the Aramean in a dream at night and said to him, be careful not to say anything to Jacob, either good or bad. In other words, I'm watching this situation. You watch yourself here. God shows up and warns him in a dream. Jacob had pitched his tent in the hill country of Gilead when Laban overtook him, and Laban and his relatives camped there too. Then Laban said to Jacob, what have you done? You've deceived me. You've carried off my daughters like captives in war. Why did you run off secretly and deceive me? Why didn't you tell me so I could send you away with joy and singing to the music of tambourines and harps? You didn't even let me kiss my grandchildren and daughters goodbye. You've done a foolish thing. So now he's playing it up like, I would have sent you away with pageantry. And now what we know of Laban is he probably wouldn't have. He probably would have said, no, stick around, work for another X number of years. Tried to swindle him instead, but he's presenting himself here like the gracious, I would have done all this. And then he plays the grandfather card. Like, you didn't even let me kiss my grandchildren. Like, if you have grandchildren, you know how powerful that card is when you play it. And then in verse 29, he sort of puffs up his chest. I have the power to harm you. But last night the God of your father said to me, be careful not to say anything to Jacob, either good or bad. Now you've gone off because you wanted to return to your father's house. Why did you steal my gods? So he's sort of accusing him now. So if you really, see from Laban's perspective, he's taken everything and hightailed it out of there. So Laban has a right to be angry, so to speak. But he's really kind of playing it up in this instance. But Jacob, verse 31, Jacob answered Laban, I was afraid because I thought you would take your daughters from me by force. But if you find anyone who has your gods, he shall not live. In the presence of our relatives, see for yourself whether there's anything of yours here with me. And if so, take it. Well, Jacob did not know that Rachel had stolen the gods. So he basically just gave a death sentence over his wife, not unknowingly, because of what she had done. So her life's in danger now. So Laban went into Jacob's tent, and into Leah's tent, and into the tent of the two maidservants, but he found nothing. After he came out of Leah's tent, he entered Rachel's tent. Now Rachel had taken the household gods and put them inside her camel's saddle and was sitting on them. Laban searched through everything in the tent, but found nothing. The camel's not in the tent, by the way. She's sitting on the saddle in the tent. The camel's outside. Rachel said to her father, don't be angry, my lord, that I cannot stand up in your presence. And NIV just flat out says, I'm having my period. King James, I think, says the way of women is upon me, or something more poetic. But literally, that's what it means. So he searched but could not find the household gods. Why wouldn't he say, why does it matter that she's having a period? Well, in the ancient world, the menstrual flow and women's period and all that was seen as having almost mystical connotations or some type of spiritual connotations, usually with the notion of impurity Not because women were seen as gross and inferior, but because anytime there was shed blood or spilled blood or a flow of blood, if it was a cut on a guy or a sore, or if it was menstrual or anything like that, that was seen as by different cultures in different ways, but most across the board it was seen as some form of impurity. This was before modern Playtex and all of the things that women have now to help it not be so messy. It's a good lunchtime conversation. But regardless, in the Bible, this was back before then. So there was a chance, there was the notion that during a woman's period, anything that she was, especially anything that she was sitting on, would be seen as either impure or contaminated, or just, a guy wouldn't go near that. Not much has changed. Guys still get grossed out when you talk about it. But that's what's going on there. So she uses that. Now, was it really her time for period? We don't know. Maybe, maybe not. But regardless, it was a clever way for her to keep whatever she was sitting on from being pilfered through by her father. So it's very crafty on her part, very deceitful, and very crafty, very Jacob-like from the previous chapter. So she's a fitting bride. Jacob was angry after Laban finds nothing. Jacob was angry and he took Laban to task. "What's my crime?" he asked Laban. "What sin have I committed that you hunt me down? Now that you've searched through all my goods, what have you found that belongs to your household? Put it here in front of your relatives and mine, and let them judge between the two of us." In other words, Jacob is now irate. He's playing it up. You searched, you didn't find anything. Let's get it all out in the open. Everybody's witnessing here. You're the one who's committed the injustice by accusing me. Then he goes on. This is where Jacob's on he's on a roll. He's on his soapbox. He's just letting it all out. "I've been with you for 20 years now. Your sheep and your goats have not miscarried, nor have I eaten rams from your flocks. I did not bring you animals torn by wild beasts. I bore the loss myself. And you demanded payment from me for whatever was stolen by day or by night. This was my situation. The heat consumed me in the daytime, and the cold at night, and sleep fled from my eyes. It was like this for 20 years I was in your household. I worked for you 14 years for your 2 daughters and 6 years for your flocks, and you changed my wages 10 times. Here's the aha moment. If the God of my father, the God of Abraham, and the fear of Isaac had not been with me, you would surely have sent me away empty-handed. But God has seen my hardship and the toil of my hands, and last night he rebuked you." So now Jacob is putting the pieces together. Finally, it's the God of Abraham and the God of Isaac that's been watching over him. He's the only reason that Jacob has prospered and is not being attacked by Laban, or at least being mistreated. Now Laban's response, verse 43, watch, there's going to be no admission of guilt here. He remains Laban to the end. Laban answered Jacob, "The women are my daughters, the children are my children, and the flocks are my flocks. All you see is mine." All right, there's this bravado. "Yet what can I do today about these daughters of mine, or about the children they've borne? Come now, let's make a covenant. You and I, let it serve as a witness between us." So he's playing the big power card. Like, this is all really mine, implying I can take it back if I wanted. But then he acquiesces. But the women have spoken, and these children, okay, fine. It's basically like him saying, trying to save face, but still relent. So Jacob took a stone and set it up as a pillar. He said to his relatives, "Gather some stones." So they took stones and piled them in a heap, and they ate there by the heap. Laban called it Jegar Sahaduthah, and Jacob called it Gali. Both of those terms, the first one's Aramaic, the second's Hebrew, and they both mean a heap of witness. Yeah, witness heap, witness pile. Laban said, "This heap is a witness between you and me today." That's why it's called Gali. It was also called Mizpah, which means like watchtower, because he said, "May the Lord keep watch between you and me when we're away from each other. If you mistreat my daughters, or if you take any wives besides my daughters, even though no one is with us, remember that God is a witness between you and me." Laban also said to Jacob, "Here is this heap, and here is this pillar, set up between you and me. The heap is a witness, and this pillar is a witness, that I will not go past this heap to your side to harm you. You will not go past the heap and the pillar to my side to harm me. May the God of Abraham and the God of Nahor, the God of their father, judge between us." So Jacob took an oath in the name of the father, in the name of the fear of his father Isaac. That's another way of saying in the name of Yahweh. He offered a sacrifice there in the hill country, and invited his relatives to a meal. After they'd eaten, they spent the night there. Early the next morning, Laban kissed his grandchildren and his daughters and blessed them. Then he left and returned home. So what started out as a fearful, violent encounter, because of the intervention of God in the dream, Laban relented. But because of the craftiness or the deceitfulness of Rachel, the inheritance rights, the family rights, Laban lost. And so we see in this continued theme that will play out in Genesis, where God is blessing and continuing to watch over this promised line despite all of their twists and turns and all of their flaws and all of their wrongdoings, because the promise God made to Abraham and to his offspring. And right now, Jacob is the carrier of that seed promise. So God is going to do what he said he's going to do. Now, Jacob is still, he's a mixed bag. When we first meet him, he's almost entirely a scoundrel. Then, over the years in Haran, you start to see this recognition of the hand of God, and you start to see him, there's glimpses of him changing. Then, at this incident now, you start to see that he's realizing what's going on and who God is. And then in the next chapter will be the watershed moment, when he no longer is Jacob, when he gets an identity change and is left with a mark forever. So we're now getting to the part of Genesis where the focus will become on the sons of Jacob, these 12 sons and this daughter of his, and their interactions, because they're adults now, most of them. There's some that are still young and one has yet to be born. But the oldest ones, at least, like Reuben and Simeon and Levi, they're all, probably mid to late teens, maybe even older at this point, maybe even up to about 19 or 20. So that's where we're headed. We're in the last phase of the book of Genesis now, where it's getting to the formation of the people of Israel and setting the stage for how did they get into Egypt. Because remember, when Genesis was given to Israel, not when it was first the stories were told, but when it was compiled in whatever form we have it in for the most part. There was some later editing probably. But it was given as part of Torah, which was given as Israel was in the wilderness. So the questions that Genesis is answering for the Israelites is, where did we come from? Who are we? And who is this God that brought us out of Egypt through the Red Sea and descended on this mountain in fire and smoke? Why should we serve him? So Genesis is giving them that account, and it's giving them, this is who the God is, this is who your fathers are. And the question that remains for the rest of the book is, how did we end up as slaves in Egypt? And it'll get to that by the end of Genesis. All right? So we are exactly out of time. 1 o'clock. Good to be back with you guys. Come back next week. Tell your friends. Bible study's still going on in the summer. So come on. We've got some table space. Let's fill this place out each week. We'll see you next week. Thanks.